Recess at the Ariel School always sounded the same, a mix of laughter, shouting, and the thud of worn-out soccer balls hitting the dirt. It was a normal Friday morning in rural Zimbabwe, the kind of morning where nothing ever happens. The kind of morning where the world feels small and predictable. And then, without warning, everything stopped. Dozens of children froze mid-play. A bright flash streaked across the sky, cutting through the glare of the African sun. Some kids ran toward it. Others stood planted, unable to move. What they saw next would follow them for the rest of their lives. Two small figures, thin, dark, with unnaturally large heads and oversized black eyes, wandered out from behind the trees. Their bodies seemed to shimmer, almost reflective, like they were absorbing the daylight instead of reflecting it. The children said the beings moved strangely, almost like they were floating. There were no adults outside, no teachers, no one to filter or interpret what the children were seeing. It was just the kids and whatever had landed in the bush. Within minutes, 62 students would report seeing the same thing. For many of them, it was the single most terrifying moment of their childhood, and decades later, as adults scattered across the world, they still described that day with the same detail, the same clarity, and the same unease. But to understand why this event became one of the most compelling mass witness UFO cases of all time, we need to understand where it happened and why this place matters. Zimbabwe, 1994, a young nation still recovering from political upheaval, rural communities shaped more by tradition and routine than by global media. Technology was scarce, and information traveled slowly, and a strange sight in the sky wasn't instantly recorded, uploaded, or analyzed. It simply lived in the minds of those who saw it. The Ariel School sat just outside the town of Ruwa, a quiet private institution with students from all backgrounds: black, white, mixed race, local, foreign children who spoke different languages at home, who believed in different things, who grew up in different cultures. And yet, after this incident, they all drew the same pictures. They all told the same story. Globally, the early 90s were a strange time for UFO culture. Roswell was back in the public spotlight. Alien abduction stories were everywhere. And a new TV show called The X-Files was about to make its debut. But Ruwa was far from that world, far from the hype, far from the noise, which makes what happened next even harder to explain. Because whatever those children saw that morning wasn't something they learned from TV, and it wasn't something they could just simply forget. This is the Ariel School alien incident. Recess at the Ariel School was halfway through when the first kids saw it, a glint in the sky, bright enough to force them to squint. It wasn't shaped like anything familiar, not a plane, not a helicopter. It didn't roar or buzz or make any sound at all. It simply moved. Too quickly at first, then too smoothly as it slowed. The object dipped behind the tall brush beyond the playground. Some children instinctively drifted toward it, the way kids do when they see something strange. Others hung back, uneasy but curious. A few would later admit that even before the figures appeared, something felt wrong in the air, an energy, a heaviness, or a sense that they weren't alone. The first figure stepped out. Small, thin, dark clothes or dark skin, the details blurred by distance and fear, but everyone agreed on the head. It was oversized, egg-shaped, pale, and the eyes were jet black and enormous, too large for the skull, reflective like glossy stone. A second figure emerged behind it. Some children froze, others instinctively backed away. A handful began screaming and sprinting toward the school building, desperate to find an adult, but most stayed rooted in place, not out of bravery, but because they couldn't look away. For better or worse, they were witnessing something together, something none of them had ever seen before. As the beings approached, the children described the same uncanny details, movements that didn't look human, a slow gliding walk, a smoothness that felt unnatural. Some said the beings were on the ground, others insisted they floated slightly above it. But the behavior is what struck them the most. They didn't speak, they didn't gesture, they simply looked at the children. And for several students, that stare didn't feel physical at all. A few kids reported feeling a wave of emotion, fear, pressure, or a strange magnetic pull. But a smaller group described something much more specific, something entering their minds. They claimed the beings communicated with them silently, without opening their mouths. Images flashed in their thoughts, the earth in danger, forests burning, oceans dying, technology spiraling out of control. Warnings about the future, warnings that made no sense to a child. Many of the younger kids broke down crying. Others felt paralyzed, unable to move or react. A group of older students tried to keep their distance, but even they later admitted something about the encounter felt inside their heads. The beings eventually turned and slipped back toward the bush. No noise, no explosion of light, no dramatic departure, just quiet disappearance. Whatever landed in Ruwa that morning had delivered its message, or its presence, and left as silently as it came. When the children ran back inside, the teachers dismissed their panic as exaggeration, nothing more than kids scaring each other. But the panic didn't fade. Kids cried, shook, and described what they saw with disturbing consistency. Parents arrived at pickup time and immediately noticed something was wrong. Students from different grades, different friend groups, even different languages, were all repeating the same story. By evening, the incident was spreading across Ruwa. By the next morning, local media picked it up. Days later, BBC reporter Tim Leach arrived to interview the children. He left visibly shaken. Leach would also later speak out about how the CIA threatened him and actively tried to silence his story. Soon after, Harvard psychiatrist Dr. John Mack flew to Zimbabwe. He interviewed dozens of students one by one and found their accounts deeply sincere, consistent, and emotionally raw. The children were asked to draw what they saw. Sketches came back nearly identical, dozens of them. Beings with large black eyes, pale heads, dark suits, long limbs. Always two of them, always in the same place, always delivering the same haunting feeling. The official narrative ends with an unprecedented conclusion: that 62 children experienced something they believed was absolutely real, something that shaped the rest of their lives. But what that something actually was has never been agreed upon. And that's where the mystery begins. The Ariel School encounter stands out because the evidence, when viewed strictly from the believer's point of view, forms a pattern that appears unusually consistent for a mass witness event. Supporters argue that the testimony, behavior, and professional evaluations surrounding the case present a compelling argument that something extraordinary occurred. The first and most frequently cited point is the number of witnesses. 62 children, spread across different grades, languages, and social circles, all described the same encounter. They were separated shortly after the incident, interviewed independently, and yet offered the same core details. Their drawings showed recurring features: a silver craft, 2 small figures, and large black eyes. Their descriptions of the location and movements matched as well, offering a surprisingly unified narrative across dozens of young students. This consistency appeared within minutes of the encounter, before outside influence or media coverage could shape their perceptions. Believers argue that matching accounts from such a large and diverse group of children, each speaking with confidence and emotional clarity, is difficult to dismiss. It forms the backbone of the pro-encounter perspective. Too many witnesses, offering too many matching details too quickly. Several of the older children described receiving internal messages or impressions they believed originated from the beings. These impressions centered on environmental destruction, misuse of technology, and concerns about the planet's future. The children explained these sensations with surprising specificity for their age. What stands out is that these children reported the telepathic aspect hesitantly. Many said they didn't want to mention it because they feared being laughed at or punished for making things up. Yet when interviewed separately, they described the same emotional tone and the same thematic warnings. Believers point to this shared internal experience as evidence of something deliberate rather than imagined. For them, the telepathic component represents one of the most unusual and difficult to explain elements of the case. Shortly after the story reached international media, Dr. John Mack, a psychiatrist from Harvard University, traveled to Zimbabwe to meet the children. He conducted structured interviews, assessing body language, emotional coherence, and the possibility of group fantasy or fabrication. Mack concluded that the children spoke with the sincerity and emotional depth of individuals recounting a real event. He noted consistent fear responses, steady recall, and a lack of cues typically associated with deception. His interviews were filmed, and viewers can observe the children's emotional intensity firsthand. Believers often cite Mack's involvement as a rare example of academic scrutiny, supporting rather than dismissing a UFO encounter. His professional evaluation is viewed as one of the strongest endorsements the case has ever received. The beings described by the children share characteristics with reports from around the world. Thin bodies, pale or reflective faces, and large black almond-shaped eyes. These descriptions align closely with the commonly referenced gray archetype in global UFO literature. Most of these children had little exposure to Western science fiction imagery. Some came from rural areas with limited access to television, and others came from home environments where global pop culture was minimal. Despite this, their sketches and descriptions matched international reports with striking accuracy. Believers argue that this level of alignment from children unfamiliar with global UFO iconography suggests they were describing something they observed, not something they had learned or imagined beforehand. In later interviews and documentaries, now as adults, many of the former students continued to describe the event in the same terms they used as children. Their accounts maintained the same sequence, the same observations, and the same emotional impact. Some witnesses admitted they tried to put the incident behind them, but the memory never faded. None of the witnesses came forward to claim it was a prank, misinterpretation, or fabrication. While some struggled with the attention the case brought, they still maintained that their original testimony reflected a real experience they lived through that day. Believers see this long-term consistency across decades, distances, and adult lives as a powerful indicator that the event left a deep, authentic imprint on those who witnessed it. Combined, these claims form a picture that believers argue is unusually strong for a UFO encounter. A large and diverse group witnessed the same thing, reported internal communication, were evaluated by a respected psychiatrist, produced sketches matching global patterns, and maintained their testimony into adulthood. While none of this proves extraterrestrial contact outright, the consistency and volume of the evidence make the Ariel School incident one of the most difficult mass witness cases to dismiss. From the skeptical perspective, the Ariel School incident is not evidence of extraterrestrial contact, but a textbook example of how human perception, childhood psychology, and social influence can create the appearance of a shared event. Skeptics argue that while there were many witnesses, the children were not isolated from each other before the story formed. They were gathered together during recess with no adults present, giving ample time for a small group's interpretation to spread rapidly and shape what others thought they saw. In high-energy environments, rumors can form within minutes, especially among young students. Once the idea took hold, other children could have unknowingly conformed to the emerging narrative. Studies in developmental psychology show that children are especially vulnerable to suggestion and often adopt details heard from peers as their own memories. This does not require deception, just a natural desire to fit emerging social expectations. Skeptics also point out that what looked like independent interviews were often conducted after the story had circulated among the children. By that point, a common version of events may already have crystallized, giving the illusion of consistency even if only a handful of children saw something unusual initially. The reports of telepathic communication are viewed skeptically as misinterpretations of fear, excitement, or confusion. Children in unusual or frightening situations often project emotions or ideas onto ambiguous stimuli, especially when faced with something they cannot easily explain. The messages could have been the result of anxiety translating into imagined thoughts. Environmental themes, pollution, technology, and global threats were already publicly discussed in the early 1990s. Concepts like deforestation and environmental decline appeared in school lessons, news segments, and children's educational programming. These ideas may have subconsciously shaped the children's interpretation of an unfamiliar figure or fearful moment. The skeptics argue that internal impressions do not constitute independent evidence. Once a few children mentioned receiving messages, others may have adopted the idea without intending to exaggerate, merging internal emotions with the shared narrative forming around them. Dr. John Mack's involvement, while authoritative to believers, is controversial among skeptics. At the time, Mack was already deeply involved in alien abduction research and faced criticism from colleagues for what they viewed as a tendency to legitimize extraordinary claims. Harvard even initiated an inquiry into his methods, citing concerns about objectivity. Skeptics point to several interviews where Mack asked suggestive questions or framed inquiries in ways that could have led children toward reinforcing alien-themed interpretations. This is especially important with young interview subjects who tend to accommodate adult expectations even without realizing it. The presence of cameras may have further influenced their responses. From this perspective, Mack's conclusions do not represent a neutral evaluation, but rather a confirmation of beliefs he already held. Skeptics argue that without a blinded or controlled investigative process, the psychological assessments lose their strength as reliable evidence. While the descriptions align with global UFO patterns, skeptics argue that this may reflect the universality of certain cultural images rather than actual extraterrestrial visitation. The large black eyes and thin body archetype had already circulated widely in news reports, documentaries, and book covers by the early 1990s, even in areas with limited media access. Additionally, no physical evidence was found at the alleged landing site, There were no burn marks, no disturbed soil, no radiation readings, and no impressions in the ground. Several teachers and local adults were nearby at the time and saw nothing unusual. The absence of physical traces is a significant problem for claims involving a landed craft and multiple beings. Skeptics argue that visual perception alone, especially at a distance and among children, is not sufficient to conclude a real encounter took place. Without tangible evidence, the case remains an anecdotal event rather than a documented one. The consistency of the witness's adult testimony may not indicate accuracy, but rather the power of reinforced memory. When individuals retell the same story repeatedly over many years, the memory becomes fixed and resistant to change, even if the original perception was incomplete or inaccurate. Familiarity replaces authenticity. Skeptics also note that coming forward publicly can create a personal investment in the story. Once a witness appears in documentaries or interviews, there is social and psychological pressure to remain consistent. Changing or doubting the story later could feel like admitting fault or losing part of one's identity connected to the event. From the skeptical viewpoint, long-term consistency does not confirm the encounter's authenticity. It only shows that the memory became part of the witness's personal narratives. This can happen with both real and misinterpreted experiences. Skeptics maintain that the Ariel School incident, while unusual, can be explained through psychology, social influence, and perceptual error. The absence of physical evidence, the vulnerabilities of childhood memory, and the potential for suggestive interviewing all weaken the case for a literal encounter. To them, the story remains compelling, but not conclusive. With both perspectives laid out, the question becomes, if neither believers nor skeptics can fully explain what happened that morning, what other possibilities remain? The Ariel School incident sits in a rare place where both the believer and skeptic explanations leave gaps. For some, the official narrative raises too many questions. For others, the skeptical interpretation cannot fully account for the consistency of the children's testimony. Over the years, investigators and researchers have proposed several alternative theories, not definitive answers, but frameworks that try to capture what might have happened when 62 children witnessed something that has never been fully explained. A misidentified human or local phenomenon. This theory suggests that the children may have encountered a person who appeared unusual from a distance. Rural Zimbabwe in the 1990s still had individuals moving between properties for agricultural, surveying, or security work. Someone wearing dark clothing, unusual headgear, or carrying equipment could have looked unfamiliar enough to a group of children to trigger confusion or fear. The bright African sun may have amplified this effect. Harsh reflections, heat distortion, and shimmering air can easily distort objects at a distance. A reflective vehicle part, a metal tool, or even a moving piece of machinery could have appeared like a shiny object descending, especially if glimpsed by excited children. This interpretation also accounts for why no adults saw anything. A lone worker or passerby might have quickly continued on their path without realizing children were watching. As fear spread among the students, they may have retroactively shaped the figure into something far more dramatic than what was actually there. Supporters of this theory argue that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and that a combination of distance, lighting, and imagination might be enough to create a shared misinterpretation that felt convincingly real at the time. A moment of collective stress or hysteria. Psychologists studying the event have proposed that children are uniquely susceptible to emotional contagion. In a schoolyard without adults present, all it takes is one frightened reaction to trigger a cascade of responses. A flash of light, a noise in the bush, or an ambiguous movement could have created a moment of collective panic. In this version, the craft and beings were not physical objects, but emotional projections built in real time. Children under stress often fill in gaps subconsciously, shaping an ambiguous stimulus into a coherent story. Once, a few children articulated what they believed they saw. Others may have aligned their memories, not deliberately, but through the natural human tendency to seek patterns in confusion. This theory is supported by historical examples, school-based panic events in India, Africa, and Europe, where students reported figures, spirits, or attackers that later proved to be misinterpretations amplified by fear and peer influence. These events often create vivid, lasting memories, despite no physical evidence supporting the claims. Importantly, this explanation does not accuse the children of lying. It suggests that they genuinely experienced fear and constructed a shared narrative around it. A psychologically real event built upon a misinterpretation of something far less extraordinary. A genuine extraterrestrial encounter. This theory takes the children's testimony at face value. A craft landed, and two beings approached them. The consistency of their sketches, their emotional reactions, and the longevity of their stories into adulthood form the backbone of the extraterrestrial hypothesis. Proponents argue that if an intelligence wanted to make contact discreetly, choosing children makes strategic sense. Children are less threatening, more open-minded, and less conditioned by skepticism or societal expectations. An encounter limited to a schoolyard during recess would achieve visibility without attracting immediate adult interference. The reported telepathic impressions also align closely with global patterns in alleged extraterrestrial encounters. Non-verbal communication, environmental warnings, and mental imagery appear across numerous cases worldwide. Supporters view this as evidence of a consistent communication method rather than coincidence. In this interpretation, the lack of physical evidence is not surprising. If the beings or craft operated using advanced propulsion or non-material technology, traditional traces might not be left behind. To believers in the extraterrestrial explanation, the Ariel School event remains one of the clearest examples of direct contact documented on camera through witness interviews. Interdimensional or ultra-terrestrial beings. The interdimensional theory proposes that the beings were not aliens in the conventional sense, but entities from a realm adjacent to ours, sometimes accessible, but usually hidden. In this framework, the craft may not have physically landed at all, but instead manifested briefly in a way that intersected with human perception. This idea is used to explain why the beings moved unnaturally, why they appeared silent, and why communication felt mental rather than verbal. If the encounter involved entities not bound to physical laws as humans understand them, their appearance could seem partially out of phase, creating the impression of gliding or floating. Supporters also point to the lack of physical evidence as consistent with a non-material or partially material manifestation. An interdimensional event might leave no ground disturbances, no radiation, and no footprints, because the entities were never fully present in our physical environment. This theory is not rooted in science fiction, but in a broader set of hypotheses explored in quantum theories, folklore, and paranormal research. The idea is that humanity occasionally perceives something that does not originate from the physical universe, but from a neighboring state of reality, and that the children simply happen to be in the right place at the right moment when two such entities became briefly visible. These expanded theories show how the Ariel School incident sits in a gray area that invites multiple interpretations. Each possibility, from misidentification to interdimensional contact, attempts to bridge the gap between the experience of the children and the lack of concrete physical evidence. None of these theories fully resolves the event, but together they illustrate why the case has endured for decades. The Ariel School encounter sits at a crossroads where belief, skepticism, psychology, and possibility all collide. What happened on that schoolyard in 1994 has never been fully explained, and perhaps that's why it still holds so much power. The testimonies of the children remain vivid, detailed, and emotionally charged. Yet the absence of physical evidence leaves the event suspended between the extraordinary and the uncertain. What makes this case especially difficult is the nature of the witnesses themselves. Children can be both reliable and unreliable in ways that adults struggle to categorize. They can cling to details with a clarity adults lose over time, but they are also easily influenced by emotion and by each other. The Ariel School incident exists in that tension. A moment where dozens of young minds encountered something they could not easily process. Over the years, every attempt to reduce the event to something simple has left unanswered questions. If it was misidentification, why did so many children describe the same details? If it was mass hysteria, why did their stories remain consistent decades later? And if it was a genuine encounter, why did it choose a remote schoolyard with no adults present? Each explanation clarifies one part of the story while leaving another untouched. What the Ariel School incident reveals, more than anything, is how little we understand about the boundary between perception and reality. Something triggered a powerful, unified response in dozens of children. Whether that something was external or internal remains debated, but its impact is undeniable. The children who witnessed it remember it not as a strange rumor or playground exaggeration, but as a moment that shaped how they see the world. The event has become a reminder that mysteries do not always need to announce themselves with evidence you can measure or record. Some arrive quietly, witnessed only by those who happen to be looking in the right direction at the right time. And some linger because they resist easy answers, inviting each new generation to reconsider what happened and whether the world is stranger than it appears. Whatever did or didn't happen that day, the Ariel School incident endures, and if nothing else, it challenges us to consider how fragile and how powerful human perception can be when confronted with the unknown.